So this morning is our opportunity to reflect on the teaching of the Lord Buddha. I'm very pleased to have been invited to Nalanda to give a Dhamma reflection, Dhamma talk. I was here about 4 or 5 years ago, and to see it development and interest is very inspiring. To see such interest in Buddha's teaching and the practice developing here in Malaysia. In fact, it's not only in Malaysia but everywhere. It just has so much interest in especially in Buddhist meditation, in the European countries and in America, Australia, New Zealand, even in places like South Africa. There are Buddhist groups, Buddhist chat groups on internet, and you name it, there's something for everyone. When I first became interested in Buddhism, this was about 1955, I was in the American Navy in Japan. I came across Zen Buddhism. And this particularly struck me as a very kind of useful way to start thinking or changing one's way of thinking about life. Because up till then my way of thinking was getting rather dreary. I mean, it brought up in a certain style and a certain attitude of absolute right and wrong and absolute good and bad. And of course it's like wearing a straitjacket. If you make conditions that the very nature is impermanent and you assume they're absolutes, then this is a conflict, creates conflict both in the intellect and on the emotional level. And at age 21, I was 21 then, I was very much aware of just the general confusion of my mind, because it seemed to be much more to life than just categorizing everything into good and bad. And of course, Zen Buddhism, as it was presented in English language at that time from Japan, it was a kind of a fashion at the time in San Francisco, Bay Area, where it was home port for the ship I was on. And it was a kind of intellectual trend, the beatnik time, but it also had a point. It introduced many of us to a different way of looking at ourselves and at life in general. And of course, what the problem these days, modern affluent countries suffer a lot from being rigidly caught in attitudes, opinions, and views that they operate from. They aren't open to Dhamma, to the way things are. They've already fixed and defined and coded everything in a certain style and operate from views, opinions, theories, ideas. Where the Buddha, the genius of the Buddha, was establishing this practice around mindfulness, or sati sampajanya, ability that we all have to pay attention in the present moment, not to have a particular opinion or a particular viewpoint that we're trying to interpret experience from, but to recognize the bliss and peace that comes from the consciousness itself. That we're not just having to defend positions, political, social, religious, philosophical opinions, where we begin to recognize an openness, a purity of consciousness that is our true nature. And once we begin to get a feeling for that, begin to appreciate that, then we can resolve our own personal conflicts, problems, difficulties that every human being has to face in life, because life for humanity is the experience of changing conditions, being caught in all kinds of mental habits, emotional habits, being brought up in a certain way to form fixed views about right and wrong, good and bad. So that's why the world is the way it is. It's the Buddha said the basic problem is avijja, which is the Pali word for ignorance of the Dhamma, not knowing Dhamma. Then we operate from ideas. So many of our good intentions come from high-minded ideas, so they direct us to maybe do good works, but it's still operating from ideas rather than from a real profound understanding of the way it is. The word Dhamma is not a definable word. You're not trying to define and put into other to describe Dhamma is it's literally impossible, because it has no definition. But it's with us all the time. It's something that is apparent here and now. It's reality itself. And that's the most you can say for it. But when we operate from ignorance, from avijja, then we can't see Dhamma. We don't operate from that. We operate from desires, wanting, not wanting, trying to control, operating out of greed, hatred, delusion, is what most is happening these days. And the problems everywhere in the world, the wars, the increasing paranoia that seems to encompass the world is due to this ignorance. Avijja is the condition that sets our life in that direction of suffering. So the Buddha, his unique teaching, now this is unique to Buddhism. I don't think any other religion or philosophy has ever approached the religious question from the position that the Buddha did. So in his first sermon, after his enlightenment, his first sermon given in Sarnath in India to his 5 colleagues who had deserted him because they were into ascetic practices, and so they had developed a high level of ascetic practices, but that isn't Dhamma anymore. It's still conditioned phenomena. It's dependent on other conditions for its support, where Dhamma isn't dependent on anything. And so when we awaken to Dhamma, we have a sense of freedom and luminosity that comes through, not feeling bound and contained and compelled by other conditions. And from this position, then we can actually observe these habits, these feelings, obsessive fears or desires or jealousies, anxieties, worries that haunt human consciousness everywhere. Now, the first sermon, I think, is I consider it, this is my opinion, so it's just for your consideration, is a brilliant teaching. And it's been a teaching that I took to almost immediately when I ordained as a Samanera. I actually wasn't ordained in 1960, it was 1966, and I was ordained before I met Ajahn Chah. I ordained in Nong Khai province, which is in the northeast near the Lao border on the Mekong River. It's where you go when you cross over to Vientiane in Laos. And so just by impulse, really, I was planning to ordain, but I had spent about 6 months in Bangkok and visiting various teachers, various ajahns, I couldn't speak Thai, so with the expatriate English-speaking communities who are interested in Buddhism, they would direct me to this Ajahn is the only good one, and then another would say, no, he's not any good, it's this one. And, and then they said, you should learn Abhidhamma first, and then another one would say, there's this Burmese method, you have to learn how to do that. And so 6 months in Bangkok, I was totally confused. And I went to visit some of the recommended Ajahns. It wasn't like a disappointment, but somehow nothing really took hold. I was just in this state of not knowing what to do, and if I just leave Bangkok, get out of here, I probably can resolve it. So quite impulsively, I disappeared from Bangkok, didn't tell anyone where I was going, and ordained in Nong Khai, and spent the Vasa, the Pansa there, first Pansa as a Samanera, a novice monk, in a meditation monastery. And there they gave me the liberty to, more or less, they'd bring some food every day, and then the rest of the day was my own. You know, I wouldn't go attend meetings or anything. I couldn't speak the dialect that they spoke, and nobody could speak English there. So I was left with myself, my mind, my habits, good and bad, and I took with me this one little book called Word of the Buddha. It was published in Sri Lanka, and it was compiled by a German bhikkhu, Yanatiloka, who took the main important teachings from the suttas and in a succinct form put them in this little book. It wasn't very big. And you think of the Tripitaka, I didn't want to have to carry that around, too big. But this little pamphlet, this was about what I could manage. So that year, that's what I contemplated, and that was, the Word of the Buddha was the exposition on the Four Noble Truths. Spending a year there, then very much by myself. When you live by yourself and you're not used to it, I was living always with others and with other people, or connected to families or whatever. There was always, somebody around. Suddenly, you find yourself all alone in a completely different culture, different country, different language, different kind of food. Everything was different. And the first 3 days I felt quite peaceful, but then after that, I experienced a lot of repressed anger arising. For the next 3 months, I had the almost relentless, ongoing experience of anger and resentment. And I trace this to the fact that I'm from a background, family background, where anger was suppressed. We were never supposed to show anger. And I even got the impression I wasn't even supposed to get angry. So when, as a child you learn to suppress your feelings, and well then, under the conditions of being alone in a little kuti, little hut in northeast Thailand, with no distraction, just this one book, not very thick book, and having to be with yourself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It was interesting, to say to understate it. Interesting because the anger wasn't due to anything in the monastery. I was being treated very well, and I have no complaints, or nobody was abusing or persecuting me in the monastery. So the anger was just arising from memories from repression of that particular strong emotion. And I was then about 31 years old. So that, somehow first I just tried to suppress it, doing a lot of samatha meditation practice, trying to control the mind. I was trying to develop jhanas and samadhi and so forth like that, so I could just suppress this anger. And I thought that's what you're supposed to do, but I couldn't do it. You could suppress it so long and then it would kind of burst forth. And I realized in lay life I had various ways of dealing with it. You feel anxious or worried, you go and eat something, or drink something, smoke a cigarette, or turn on the telly, or whatever. You got a whole life of distractions so that you don't really have to face your repressed feelings. You've got means to kind of avoid them. But when you're alone in a little hut and with nobody to talk to, either you go crazy or you use the situation. This is where the Four Noble Truths I found my savior. It was through developing awareness around those noble truths that I benefited so much from that year, that gave me the direction for the rest of my life. For one thing, the angry period lasted quite a long time. I thought maybe that it was going to stay with me forever. The biggest fear was that I was going to just get angrier and angrier. But actually it began to fade out, and then one morning, I woke up in this little hut, and there was no anger in my mind. And everything looked bright and beautiful. The kuti was just a wooden, not very well made wooden hut. It looked absolutely beautiful, and the forest outside was a kind of scrubby, nondescript forest, but it was luminous, beautiful, and like paradise. Everything was beautiful to me at that time. Then I think, why am I not angry anymore? And I tried to bring back memories that before would make me angry, and they had no effect. So I began to experience luminous consciousness. And it was the first introduction that I never ever remember experiencing that before. And so somehow the 3 months of anger and resentment and fear, by just abiding, just by patiently enduring it, that allowed all these repressed emotions to manifest and go away. So it was really a purification rather than me practicing meditation in the wrong way. That was my fear, that I wasn't meditating rightly, because you got these ideas that if you meditate rightly, you'll experience bliss. For 3 months, I experienced hell. And then you start worrying about yourself. Maybe you're not capable, or that. But all that faded out. And in that moment that I awoke, I didn't have wisdom to know what had really happened. So I thought I was enlightened. And I thought, American, we're very good at these things. It might take time, a lifetime, but for me, 3 months is a conceit of American ego. And so I stayed in that state for almost a week, and then I had to renew my visa. to go to the immigration in Nong Khai and renew my visa. So I went there, and they were very rude to me. Didn't want to renew the visa, but did. They actually did it, and they were very rude and cold. And here I was in this very blessed state, and suddenly that just crashed down. That luminosity and beauty and bliss disappeared. I wanted it back, so I rushed back to the monastery and tried to get that, because I was operating now from memory, wanting what I remembered. Actually, that luminous reality appeared because I didn't even know what it was. I had no memory, never experienced it before, so there was absolutely no desire or operating from some previous experience that would arouse desire. But then reading the Jnanatiloka's book, The Word of the Buddha, I began to put things together, because then I started actually developing a wisdom faculty through contemplating these Four Noble Truths. So the first noble truth is there is dukkha, or the Pali word dukkha is translated generally as suffering. It can be translated as stress, or I mean, it just means suffering of some sort, you know. And I think the English word suffering is broad enough. Actually, it means, you know, literally means what can't be borne, what you can't bear. But it's like taking this suffering and examining it. It's not trying to get rid of it. Where before, say as an ordinary person, my efforts were always to try to get rid of suffering and find happiness. The American way of life, you know. Life should be wonderful, and you should enjoy it. So happiness is the goal of life, and then suffering is, usually you're blaming it on somebody else, or blaming it on your parents, or your prime minister, or your congressman, or whatever. There's always somebody you can blame for one's unhappiness or misery. But that's not the noble truth of suffering. That's just the ordinary way we tend to see it as something caused externally. And the first noble truth isn't about that kind of experience, even if someone is abusing you, you know, or treating you badly. The suffering really is your anger, resentment, fear that you create in your mind around what's happening to you. And then this is the noble truth, to recognize suffering and not the kind that you're receiving from external causes, but the way you react to life in general, to your family, to your colleagues in business, and whatever you're doing. So it's a noble truth, and this word noble is interesting because my sarcastic mind would say, what's noble about suffering? A noble truth? I mean, it's a nasty fact of life as far as I was concerned, you know. It's something nobody wants. I didn't want to suffer. I always wanted to be happy. So, and then the Buddha calls, as first sermon, notice it's the first sermon he gave after his enlightenment. And it's not, he's not proclaiming himself as I'm the all enlightened one. You know, even though that's true, he didn't announce to these five, the Bhattacharya, the five colleagues, that he was enlightened. He said, there is suffering, there is the origin, there is the cessation, there is the path. of non-suffering. So notice that this is a very skillful, psychologically skillful way of presenting a helpful, expedient teaching, such as the Four Noble Truths are. If he was pointing to himself saying, I'm the all-enlightened Buddha, then everybody would have, some people would have said sadhu, others would have said, I don't believe it, or they would see him as a person. You'd be pointing, people would take that as a proclamation of personal achievement, because that's what it sounds like. Just the structure, I am the all-enlightened one, sounds egotistical. So that his basic teaching was there is suffering. Now that is, then he gives you advice on what to do about it. He's not just making a statement and leaving it there. He said, suffering should be understood. And to understand something, you have to accept it. You know, if you're always trying to get rid of suffering, you'll never understand it. Or if you're always blaming it on somebody else, then you'll never understand why you suffer, your own suffering. You'll never see it. You merely react to it. Where in the Buddha's advice, suffering should be understood. Notice this is a prescription. He's saying what to do about it. He said there is suffering, should be understood. And to understand something, you look at it, examine it, recognize it. And in this direction, what the Buddha is looking at here, and then in the Thai forest tradition, the Ajahns, they aren't pointing to themselves as a personality, but to the heart element. You know, you look here in the mind, in the consciousness, in the citta, they say. And so you examine these Four Noble Truths in your citta, in your consciousness, as you begin to experience that. Each Noble Truth gives you a slightly different angle, different perspective on this. The important aim is to turn your attention away from outwardness, always seeking things outwardly, towards inward kind of introspection, investigation. And so it's not to blame yourself. I mean, sometimes one can suffer a lot because we blame ourselves. In England, where I lived for many years, people tend to be very self-critical. So they suffer a lot of guilt because they always so caught up with what they think is so what's wrong with them. And so in England, people are always apologizing for existing. You know, I'm sorry I'm here. I'm not taking too much time up and that kind of thing. But at least it's an introspective quality. So I found somehow teaching there quite rewarding because, they've got the direction, but the interpretation's wrong. And so trying to get the interpretation right, at least so many of the people I met there were blaming themselves, that their suffering is due to some fault they have or whatever. Well, that can be introspective, but it's still operating out of avijja, isn't it? The sense of, I shouldn't be, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have said that, I should have been more sensitive, and on like that. You can go, carry on for a lifetime of self-criticism because you obsessed with what you think you should be, and the way you are, you seem to think is not good enough. So there's a lot of guilt problems in the Western world, in the European countries, in America. Because like you ask any American about how things should be, and they'll tell you right off, should be democratic, should be like America. everybody should be free, everything should be fair, we should all get along with each other. I mean, we have no problem with how things should be, and that's idealism. It's about creating some ideal situation just by thinking in very high-minded terms, in superlatives. I think the best, and democracy is the best, or equality and freedom, everything, the best possible altruistic thoughts. That's we're highly developed on that level of how things should be, or how things shouldn't be. There shouldn't be corruption. There shouldn't be exploitation. There shouldn't be inequalities and so forth. And then when we're caught in these should concepts, we're not mindful. There's not wisdom in it. It just makes us discontent, because life in whatever country you're living in can never be what we want it to be or should be. But it is the way it is. So like living in Malaysia is like this. You're not saying, it's not criticizing or to being highly nationalistic or whatever, but it's a way of opening to the way it is as you're experiencing it, just to have that sense of openness rather than automatic kind of judgment, opinions and views and prejudices arise and operate from anger or fear that we can all do if we don't understand our suffering, the nature of our own minds. Then the Buddha advised that suffering should be understood, and then there's three aspects to every noble truth in the formula, in the actual sutta itself. There's the Bhariyati statement, the statement from the scripture, there is suffering. That's from the Tripitaka, that's from the first sermon. And then the second aspect is about what to do about it. It's a prescription to deal with suffering, should be understood. And so that's bhatibhata, or put it into practice, investigate it, not just accept there is suffering and just grasp that as some kind of ultimate teaching, because that's rather depressing if you're seeing it as a kind of, that's all you're thinking, and it's all suffering, and what's the point? It can be quite meaningless and depressing. But what to do about suffering? Remember, these are noble truths, not ultimate truths. They're not metaphysical truths. It's a noble truth. And this realm that we live in is the experience of suffering. And in monastic life, every day we reflect on that our life is about old age, sickness, death, is about loss of loved ones, is about change, wanting things that we don't have, or not wanting things to be the way they are. It's about desire, wanting, not wanting. It's about anxiety and fear of the future. The future is the unknown, so you can imagine anything happening in the future. Success, good fortune, fame, long life, good health, that's what we all want for the future, but we also know we might end up with the opposite. With misery and suffering, sickness and loss. So, but this kind of mindfulness practice is being aware that the future is unknowable. We have hopes for the future, or expectations, or fear, or dread, but the reality is right now, as we're sitting in this hall, we don't know tomorrow what it'll be. It's the unknown. And then to know that, know you don't know, that's beginning of wisdom. So you're not trying to, sometimes you go to fortune tellers or palmists or people that can predict the future because you'd like to know what will happen to me and my family in the future. But no matter what they say, it doesn't really resolve the problems and suffering. So where this does actually, when you stop trying to know things that you can't really know, but you can know you don't know the future. Now that's wisdom, developing wisdom. And in the past, like I was saying, like in England people suffer a lot because they feel guilty about things they've done in the past, things they've said or done, or things that they think they've done, or possibilities of making mistakes in the past. And this kind of mea culpa, I'm to blame mentality, this guilt-ridden sense of, I did something I shouldn't, I said something I shouldn't have said. And that is attachment to memories. And so we create suffering about the past. But when we contemplate time here and now, we're sitting here in Nalanda at this very moment, the past is a memory. Whatever you remember of yesterday or this morning or whatever, it's memory that arises. So the past is a memory. It's just if we attach to memories, then we create guilt because we can imagine we should have said it differently or shouldn't have done that, or and then we they say looking backward in time is like 20/20 vision. You can see everything you should have done. But at the present, we don't always have perfect vision. So the past is a memory, the future is the unknown, and then now is the knowing. So this emphasis on Paccuppanna Dhamma, or now is the knowing, is essential for developing. Because in reality, there's only now. You're always experiencing whatever, suffering now. You can anticipate suffering, in the future, but but actually that anticipation of suffering in the future, if you really look at it, is you're suffering right now. Just by worrying about the future, you're suffering right now. So you're bringing everything down to the reality of now, and being the witness to it, the observer. Now we can do this. This is because we have this reflective capacity. We're not just helpless victims of fate and conditioning. If we couldn't reflect on anything, then on Four Noble Truths, on here and now and time, if we couldn't do that, then we'd just be helpless victims of habit, of conditioning, or our karma. So we all have our particular karmic patterns, tendencies that can differ from one to the other. And some people have very good karma. They're born into very nice families with all kinds of opportunities, and others born, deformed and in poverty and so forth. And say it's their karma. It's one way of just dismissing life, but that's not it. The karma, we all have the karma of having been born and lived up to the age that we're experiencing now. So we begin to, this karma can can be seen as a victim, like why was I born into poverty, deformed and in poverty, and then we can blame God or let's blame somebody because it's not fair. It's not right. Some people born into wealthy, good families with all kinds of opportunities, and others born in the opposite direction. It's not fair in terms of the ideal of fairness. But in terms of Dhamma, it doesn't really matter. It's, whether you're poor or rich or deformed or healthy, beautiful or not, whatever, because what we're developing is wisdom, and that's available to all of us. And that means that we can see the suffering we create around the idea of being poor or disabled or whatever. We create suffering around thinking that this body is mine, my social background is low, my parents were not very good, and so forth. We become victims. We create our suffering around our karma, our vipaka karma. But with mindfulness and wisdom, then we can stop doing that. We can see more clearly that whatever we're experiencing, is the way it is. It's a condition that arises in the present, it arises and ceases. So this is what developing wisdom is about. It's seeing things as they are. It's not criticizing, it's not judging and saying how things should be, because we all know how things should be. But the way things are, it takes this more kind of open attitude. It's like this. And you don't need to define it or judge it or criticize it or do anything with it, but just recognize right now my mood, my emotional state is like this. And you're more or less observing. You're letting go. You're not trying to get anything or get rid of anything. You're just relaxing, observing, paying attention to the reality of now. Now this course on the Four Noble Truths is something that is available to all of us. It's not a secret teaching. Some people used to say in Thailand, that, well, that's for monks. Meditation is for monks, but lay people just give dana. In Europe, they don't think like that. They think they want the teaching, and oftentimes don't think about dana. I mean, different culture. Because now, like Vipassana meditation is a very big thing in the United States and in Western Europe and so forth, because people really need something to develop wisdom. And you have everything else but wisdom. And so, even with the best of everything else, without wisdom, it can be quite meaningless, and people get depressed. A lot of alcoholism, drug addiction, things like this, obsessive concern for foolish things, and because people don't understand themselves, don't understand their needs and their desires, where in this kind of attitude, then you're taking an interest in your own humanity, in what is being human about, is it what separates us from the other creatures, which we share common ground with the animal kingdom. So some people think we're just a higher form of ape or monkey. some people object to, others don't mind. Maybe we're more intelligent kind of chimpanzee or whatever, but but whatever it is, we have this retentive memory. We remember, what's happened to us in the past. Where the animal kingdom, they don't seem to have that same thing. I was thinking one time I was going Tudong in northern England, and Tudong is the practice of walking, and going from one place to another, and you camp out really, and in Yorkshire. And it was the springtime, it's beautiful. Yorkshire in the springtime, the Yorkshire Dales is really paradise. It's very, very beautiful. And then I was with another monk and a layman, and we were walking. I heard this incredible anguish crying somewhere. It's a kind of like reverberating from the hills. And I wondered, what is that? It sounds really sad, but I don't see anything. I don't notice any animals around. And then the layman told me, he said, well, it's probably on the other side of the hill, a shepherd has taken away the lambs from their mothers. And that's part of the shepherd's duty. You take away the little lamb from the mothers. And the mothers were weeping and crying and wailing, the female sheep. And I thought, that, and then the layman said, but tomorrow they won't remember. Oh, just imagine if somebody did that to a human woman. She'd remember it the rest of her life. And every time she remembered, she'd be crying, So I mean, this is what retentive memory is, a kind of curse, but also a blessing. And so we have to remember things from the past that sometimes we just as soon not remember, forget totally. But this retentive memory is also a gift in the fact that we have language, we develop language, and we can also reflect on things. Just like the Four Noble Truths. We can actually take suffering as a first noble truth and reflect on it. Not form opinions, like Buddha said, everything's suffering, and just go on as some kind of intellectual logic from grasping the first noble truth out of ignorance. But it's to be understood, and that understanding then takes this reflective capacity to observe, to pay attention to what's going on here, without judging. It's not about telling you how you should feel, or sometimes we think, oh, don't think about it, it just makes you more miserable. Sometimes we have these inner voices that, like common sense and logic and that are telling us what to do. But actually with reflecting on the First Noble Truth, to understand it is to receive it and let it be what it is. You don't have to do anything with it. Just let it be what it is, and then you will see its presence. And then because its nature is impermanent, then it ceases. And in that cessation of it, you're realizing the end of suffering, of that condition. The cessation takes place here. Because the Buddha reiterated over and over again, all conditions are impermanent. Sape sankarani cha. This is a common reflection, a common chant. Sape sankarani cha, all conditions, and that word condition is the translation of sankhara. What it means, everything is impermanent. Everything we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, feel, pleasant or unpleasant. The sun, moon, and stars are impermanent. far away or near, or internally or externally, everything is a sankhara. Well, in that way, we're relating to sankhara, not through judging it or having our preferences. We like some sankharas better than others. It's not about picking and choosing, it's just noticing. Paying attention to what is closest, like sun and moon too far away. And and it's much older than we are, so we don't have, it's hard to get any perspective on the changingness of the sun. Except we do talk a lot about climate change these days. But we can be aware of the climate change in the mind, as it shifts around and arises and ceases. And then that awareness allows us to, then wisdom informs us, informs our consciousness. We see things through wisdom, through a universal wisdom, rather than through personal habits, personal conditioning. So this reflection, what I'm trying to do is reflect for you, and anything I say, not to be grasped, but it's to kind of encourage you. We do need encouragement in our meditation, because we tend to at first feel quite discouraged, because we have ideas of wanting peace and tranquility, and the mind natters on, and we don't quite know what to do with it or how to control it. So we tend to doubt ourselves, or doubt whether we can meditate, or doubt what the teacher says. And we get discouraged or despairing in regards to our attempts at meditation. This is common enough. So encouragement is very helpful, because it's like saying you can do it. Don't despair, rather than saying, maybe you're not really meant for meditation. Then you might believe me if I said that. I've talked to people who've been told that they can't meditate yet because they're not ready, and then they actually believe it. So that's not encouraging. That's reinforcing the ego, that you're somebody who's not good enough to meditate. So say that the suffering is available to all of us. Doesn't have to be special. Just the kind of anxiety or the restlessness that you experience. It doesn't have to be great anguish thing like your baby snatched away by a kidnapper. It can be just around worrying about tomorrow's meal, and you can observe that which knows the suffering isn't sankhara. And this is where the Buddha said, this is the path to the deathless. There's awareness, sati sampajanya, sati panya, path, it's the gate, the door that we open, that we can escape the whole illusion of samsara or the conditioned realm. And so this is an encouragement, not doctrinal. I don't expect you to believe me, but I'm planting this seed in your mind, so that, you start questioning, is your assumptions about yourself and birth and death and Buddha Dhamma and all the rest really something to grasp, or what are you doing about it? And encourage you to investigate these Four Noble Truths. So I offer this as a reflection for today.